I'm joined by Congresswoman Val Demings, Democrat of Florida, whose district includes parts of Orlando, including this bar, Hooch, on Wall Street Plaza, that we are sitting in right now, and former Republican Congressman David Jolly. It's great to have you both here.
Good to be with you, Chris.
So there was sort of interesting. There's been some interesting polling coming out about this. Obviously, let me just say that the first order question is the most important. Whether he was truthful, whether the allegations are true, what happens. But this happens in a political context, obviously, in the midterms. And there is some polling from NPR suggesting amid Kavanaugh confirmation battle, the Democrat enthusiasm edge had evaporated, that this had sort of activated more marginal Republicans in this fight. I'm curious if that's something you've seen anecdotally.
Anecdotally, yes. And Chris, I've been on the West Coast, the East Coast, and the Northeast in the last 5 days, and Republican intensity is up. You are seeing them dig in their heels, and I think the White House team has seen that. That's why you've seen Sarah Sanders' rhetoric change, Kellyanne's rhetoric change, and frankly, the president's as well. This has now become the hill that they want to die on.
Yeah.
I think it's the wrong hill for them to die on. But to the earlier point as well, it is bigger now than issues of sexual misconduct and drinking. What has happened as the time has led on is questions about his fitness. And that is an area where Republicans are going to get into a very dangerous place, because even with the Gorsuch nomination and all the controversy around Merrick Garland, his fitness was never in question.
Right.
Kavanaugh is somebody whose fitness is now in question.
What do you think about how this sort of resonates among different constituents?
You know, I think certainly that you have seen the excitement, if you will, from the Republicans increase and the rhetoric change as well. But for Democrats, we have to stay focused. We still have the edge, the advantage right now. We have to just stay laser focused. But this is about fitness. And Judge Kavanaugh has applied for a job. This is not a privilege to sit on the United States Supreme Court. It is a job. As a police chief, I had the honor of hiring a lot of men and women to serve in that very important position. Imagine if I had a candidate who danced with the truth or danced around the truth, was deceptive, or someone who had multiple allegations of sexual assault against him. Why on earth would you give the job to that person? Surely we can do better than that.
Or someone that yelled at you. I mean, that's the other thing, right? I mean, like someone that just came in there and said, how dare you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been an investigator. I've been an investigative sergeant. If you looked at his, quote, interview, because that's really what he was going through Thursday, and the people who had the power to confirm him or at least recommend him for confirmation or not, he was belligerent. Yeah. He was angry. We've already talked about how partisan he was. And this statement bothers me more than anything. What comes around goes around. What does that mean coming out of the mouth of someone who wants to sit on the Supreme Court?
He's quoting the Bible and said, you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind.
That's right.
Which basically seemed a little bit like an open threat.
Yeah, sure. I also have to add, though, Chris, this is such a perfect reflection and such a sad reflection of the state of the Republican Party under Donald Trump. And what I mean by that is for several weeks I've been suggesting, nobody's listened, but Kavanaugh should withdraw. Right. That the safest route for Republicans is to find an equally conservative justice. So Mike Lee from the United States Senate, one of the other nominees that have been vetted, remove this conversation about alleged sexual assault from the Republican narrative. Instead, Trump's Republican Party chooses to double down on it, to attack a victim in the middle of the Me Too movement. The Republican Party is attacking that very movement.
And that moment last night, it was dark and it was unsettling to the president, but the worst part was the crowd, the relish with which, as they saw what he was doing, they got more and more into it. The laughter, the uproarious laughter, as Dr. Ford said about her alleged assault, the indelible in the hippocampus is the uproarious laughter. I want you to stay with us. Here in Orlando, we have much more to come. The White House is trying to dismiss that blockbuster New York Times report suggesting that President Trump, quote, participated in dubious tax schemes during the 1990s, including instances of outright fraud, quoting the paper there. NBC News has not been able to independently verify the Times reporting, and a lawyer for the president said in a statement, quote, there was no fraud or tax evasion by anyone. The White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders today was unable, when pressed repeatedly, to point to a single lone factual error in the report.
It's a totally false attack based on an old recycled news story. I'm not going to sit and go through every single line of a very boring 14,000-word story.
Still with me, Congresswoman Val Demings and former Congressman David Jolly. It was interesting to me today that there were no factual rebuttals to anything in that report.
Well, how could they? You know, when the story came out today, the amazing part is that no one was really surprised. Even those who support the president, those who do not support the president, no one was really surprised because that's who he is.
Right.
He is a con man who has conned his way into the most powerful position in the world.
And yet it's still the case that the paper and record puts on the front page a 14,000-word investigative piece that says the president committed outright fraud, he and his family, over the course of decades. And people are kind of like, figured.
Fraud's the important word, and it was done with deliberation, right? There's a saying, I'm going to pay every dollar I have to in taxes, but not $1 more.
Right.
That is not this story. This is a story about an outright scheme to defraud the federal government.
And you saw tax lawyers today making that point, right?
Of course.
Saying, like, if you think everyone does this, this is a sort of special
But some
kind
of
thing.
what was in the Times is fully legal.
Right.
It's just a tax strategy,
Right.
and some is outright fraud. But here's the interesting thing, Chris. The Republican Party is going to love this. The Republican base is going to love this because this is exactly who Donald Trump is. He's the guy that knows how to beat the system. And the same system that has pushed down these people that he speaks to, this populist message, they feel that the government, big government's coming for them. Donald Trump just beat them at their own game.
Well, and it also, to me, it speaks to this very sort of profound way in which the president marshals law and order or even thinks about the law. I mean, you're a former police chief here in Orlando. I mean, it appears the president, every chance he gets, the FBI's corrupt. Rob Porter got a raw deal, accused of domestic violence. What happened to innocent until proven guilty in due process? And then, lock him up, throw away the key if it's anyone who's sort of outside his sphere.
Destroying the institutions. I mean, that has really been his game from the very beginning. If you destroy any faith in the Department of Justice or judiciary, the media, institutions that the American people have depended on, then the only news that they get is from you.
Right.
And so here we go again with his outright fraud in his own taxes. I remember when I heard him say that his father gave him a small loan of $1 million.
That's a direct
I certainly
quote.
wish I could get a small loan of $1 million, but we know that it was closer to $413 million, which he pretty much squandered.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing. That's who we have, though.
But there's a question now, a functional question, which is what's in the president's tax returns. It's not that you would see everything, but and members of Congress can get that.
They can.
I mean, if a majority could.
Listen, oversight is nothing more than a political tool of the Republican majority right now. They have no interest in the truth. The person who has the tax returns is Bob Mueller.
Yeah.
And if there's something in there, we're going to hear it from Bob Mueller. And the American people, they get to send a message in about 35 days on November 6th. The number one issue on this ballot is Donald Trump. Don't believe anything else. It is whether or not you believe Donald Trump has put the nation on the right path or the wrong path.
And David, you're absolutely right. I mean, right now, the majority has no interest in getting the returns. But if Democrats take back the House,
that seems like a day one agenda. Do you think, very quickly, is that true here or even in Florida in these big statewide races, governor and Senate, that Donald Trump still looms over both those races?
Oh, yeah.
Ideology is second. Donald Trump is the only issue. And the president has acknowledged in the last week, this is his race. This is a vote about him.
Even in the gubernatorial race, you think, with Gillum and DeSantis?
DeSantis has tied himself to Donald Trump like
almost
one of his
comically,
children.
yeah.
That's right. He is still a big matter, a big factor in this race.
All right. Congresswoman Val Demings and David Jolly, it's great for you to
Good to be with you,
take time
Chris.
and come see us down
Thank you.
here.
being in
Great
Florida.
to be here.